Either you like it or not, or either you follow the methodology or you don't. You have to admit that the Challenger sale and all the books which are then related to the Challenger sale changed the world of sales in probably the last 20 years, I'd like to say. And in the last months, another book came out that will change again the world of sales. And I'm happy to have here on the show Matt Dixon, who will probably tell us why he keeps changing our job.
Hello, my friend. How are you? Thank you for having me on the show.
No, thank you for joining the show. And yeah, I appreciate that you're here. And, I had a lot of questions about not only
Sure.
the books, but the, as I said before, the change you're bringing again in the game. So let me just start. I know everyone knows you. Everyone knows you, but if you want to give a brief introduction about yourself and what you're doing now,
Sure.
especially in DCM, which I think is a really good, let's call it the kind of place where ideas birth.
Right. Right. So, I just by way of background for the listeners, I don't. It's funny. I don't. I've struggled for a long time to try to explain to my mom and my dad what I do for a living. They don't know. They think I'm a spy. They said, "I don't understand what you do. You work for this weird agency. It's got some letters. I think you're a spy." So they said, "No, no, no, mom and dad, I'm not a spy." But somebody said to me recently, and I thought this was a good description. They said, "You're like a sales anthropologist." So you're not a salesperson and you're not a sales leader, but you're a person who brings data and research methods to study sales and to understand customer buying behavior. And so that's, I think, a pretty good description. I've been in the space of sales and customer experience research for, gosh, a long time. It seems like to me now. And I spent most of my career at a company called CEB, which was acquired by Gartner Group. That's where I worked with Brent Adamson and Nick Tomand and Pat Spenner and all those guys who we wrote the Challenger Sale, the Challenger Customer, the Effortless Experience with. And so I've been in the business of studying sales. And it's funny because now you mentioned DCM. I went out and started my own research organization with two former colleagues, Rory Channer and Ted McKenna. They both worked with me at CEB, and we wanted to kind of get the band back together and go out and do more research into sales and customer experience. But I think back to your question, your original question about, like, why change sales again. I think it's an interesting question. I think Brent would agree with this too. um, the it's not so much that we're trying to change sales, it's more that we're trying to understand how buying has changed, how the customer changes. And I think most people who are in sales would agree there's been more change in customer buying behavior in the last 20 years maybe than in the previous 100 years combined. It's just such a period of rapid change in terms of how customers want to do business with companies, how they want to buy from salespeople, and we've just been trying to understand the implications of that. And so, what all of our research really is about, it starts with the what's going on in the customer world, and then we go and we try to study what are the best salespeople doing differently. Maybe it's Challenger, maybe it's some other approach, but what are they doing differently? And is there a way we can document that with data and provide language? And then it provides a playbook for everybody else, right? But it's always been true of best salespeople, like yourself, who understand the customer buying world is changing. And you say, I know I was trained and coached to do this, but I don't know that that's the right answer anymore. So I'm going to do things a little bit differently. And through trial and error, you figure out a new way to sell and to continue to be effective and maybe even increase your effectiveness. But what happens is the gap between people like you and sort of core performing salespeople starts to grow and grow and grow. And then suddenly the company says, hold on a second, what's going on? What are these guys doing that's different from what these guys are doing? Let's see if we can understand it. And so that's kind of where we come in as researchers.
Thank you for the answer. So now we also know that you have another company that, as I
Yeah.
told you, will change again our job. No, but
Right.
I'm happy that, you know what, I'm happy that since I think after the Challenger sale, you started talking about buyers.
Hmm.
That's what was different, from that
Yeah.
time. Eh, as a salesperson who loves to train and buy courses and stuff,
Yeah.
I follow almost everyone, and everyone was talking about different way of selling while you were talking about a different way of buying. It seems
Right.
that 2011 for you was kind of the day where you stopped talking about salespeople, you started talking about customers, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. I mean, I think that's and that's what makes this unique. I mean, so and you talked to Brent on the show, I know, and he and I will often we'll travel around the world, and we talk about you know um, when we tell the challenger story, for instance, which I think many of your listeners probably know that story. Five types of salespeople, and the challenger wins, and the relationship builder loses. But the story always starts with what's going on in the customer world. And the first insight we always share is that customers are 57% of the way through the buying journey before they ever call or email or reach out to the salesperson to say, hey, let's have a conversation, or can you give me a demo, or can we talk about doing business together? So they've already been very far down the learning path before we ever engage with them. That means that in today's world, it's no longer a differentiating approach for a salesperson to come in and say, hey, what's keeping you up at night? Because the customer already knows what's keeping them up at night. They've already figured that out. They've already started to research different solution providers, and they already know that you're on the short list. And now they want to talk about what you can do for them. So it doesn't, in that world, it doesn't help to ask the customer what's keeping them up at night. The better approach, what challengers do, is they show the customer what should be keeping them up at night. In a world where customers can learn on their own, they show the customer what they couldn't learn on their own. Here's the thing you've overlooked. Here's the missed opportunity. Here's how you might think about this opportunity differently. And so but it all starts with that customer change in the customer world. I think if we hadn't seen that, I don't think we would ever have seen challengers in the data.
And I think that this is also what kind of links with your most recent book.
Mhm.
And I mean, when I read the Jolt Effect, and I said, "Wow, this is really a book about fear and indecision,"
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and that is nothing, in my opinion, more actual than the fear and indecision in the buyer world. And
Yeah.
this is why I'd like to ask you just like a brief overview of the book,
Sure.
which I think most of my listeners have bought already. So,
Yeah, absolutely. No, happy to do that. So if we, one of the thing I'll say, there's a little bit of, I'll maybe be a bit of a nerd here for a moment because it's, it's kind of part of the story. We talk about this in the book, but had become interested in this problem of no decision losses. And so as a salesperson, you know this, and I think many of your listeners know this. There's nothing more painful than when you lose a deal to no decision. And I think for sellers, what that often means, look, high performing sellers will decide. There's an old saying, right? Don't chase garbage trucks in sales. And so I think high performing salespeople know this deal is not going to come in, and I'm going to spend my time somewhere else, and they will disqualify that deal from their pipeline. But I think what usually happens for most salespeople is they chase a deal. They get the happy ears. The customer says they want to buy. They get all excited. They forecast the deal. It's going to close. They tell their manager, this is coming in, and then the customer starts to ghost them. They go radio silent, right? They don't answer their emails anymore. They don't show up for the Zoom call anymore. We are sending emails to say, "Oh, I just want to put this at the top of your inbox so you see it again." We're trying to get back in, and then we that happens for a few weeks, maybe even a few months, and then our manager says, "Look, we spent too much time on this. There's been no update. The customer's not responding. We've got to mark it as closed, lost, no decision in the CRM system." But we never really understand why. Now, this is a huge problem. It was something we started to hear over the past few years, and then we had a moment in March of 2020 where we had an opportunity to study this problem in a totally different way. So my co-author and I, Ted McKenna, we were working at a company called Tether, which is a conversation intelligence company similar to Gong or Chorus or these kinds of companies. And they take sales calls, customer service calls, and they use machine learning to study them to surface insights. And so in March of 2020, as you remember very well, was a very interesting time in the world of sales because all sales, the entire sales process became 100% virtual. It all happened on Zoom, right? So we went out to several dozen companies and we said, we have this powerful technology. And would you participate in a study and record all of your sales calls and send us all of your sales calls? And we got several dozen companies agreed to do it. They sent us 2.5 million sales calls. We transcribed those. So we turned the audio into text, and then we use a machine learning platform to study them. And the questions we had were twofold. Why do no decision losses happen? And what do the best salespeople do differently to avoid this outcome, this very bad outcome? The first thing I'll tell you is we found that actually it happens a lot more than you would think. Anywhere, depending on the go to market model, anywhere between 40 and 60% of a salesperson's qualified pipeline is going to be lost ultimately to no decision. And so, as a salesperson, if you're listening, you're a salesperson, you could do the math. Or if you're a sales manager, you can multiply that by the 10 people on your team. And if you're a sales leader, you can multiply that by the 50 or 100 salespeople in your organization. And you think about all that lost productivity chasing opportunities that go nowhere. And look, some of our customers will be kind enough to tell us, "Hey, I'm not ready. We're not going to make a decision right now. We still want to keep the conversation going, but we're going to stay on the sidelines right now." But most customers will not tell you that. They will just disappear. And then again, we chase them for a while, and then our manager says, "Okay, enough. Let's get on to the next opportunity." So I think that the big surprise. So this it was surprising to us to see that it happened so often. But I'll tell you that where the research really took an interesting turn, and we realized this was a different kind of problem than any problem we had studied before, was when we looked at what salespeople tend to do when the customer expresses hesitation. So you know this. You've been on lots of sales calls, right, in your career, and you're so have those in your audience. But we know that moment that happens right after the customer says, "This sounds great. I think we should keep talking. Let's start working on a proposal," but before the point where they actually sign the agreement. And that's this no man's land. And what ends up happening there is the customer starts getting nervous and they start talking themselves out of it, and they start bringing up objections and concerns and all these things that you think, boy, we talked about that 6 months ago. Why are you still why are you bringing this up again? And suddenly for the salesperson, it's like deer in the headlights. This deal is slipping away from me. Like I'm losing, it's slipping through my fingers. And so they have to do something in that moment of hesitation the customer has. So, what salespeople tend to do, because they've been taught to believe that the only reason you lose a deal is because the customer still prefers their status quo. They believe what they're doing today is good enough. They don't believe your solution is a compelling enough reason to change, or they don't think it's a top priority for their business. Is one of those reasons, right? Those are all about they prefer the status quo. The status quo is sufficient. We don't need to change. Thank you, but no thank you. And so salespeople have been taught, if a customer hesitates, if they get cold feet, it's because you haven't conquered the status quo. You haven't beaten the status quo. And so we tell salespeople, go back and beat the status quo, break out your status quo hammer and go to work. And so what you see in the data is actually very interesting. Is three different techniques that salespeople use. The first one is they will go back and they will try to reconvince the customer how great the solution is. Tobias, you must have missed how many zeros are in the ROI calculation, or did you blink when we showed you the demo and how cool this is? Like, how could you say no? It's amazing. If I don't can't convince you that way, the second attempt is the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And so then I say to you, I don't know if you noticed, but we work with all of your competitors and they are experiencing tremendous benefits from working with us. And you are going to be stuck with this terrible, status quo. And we try to create that burning platform, like look, these problems aren't going to solve themselves. You can't wish them away. And we hope that that will convince the customer to move forward because we scare them a little bit, get them to realize the cost of their inaction. The third approach, if those two approaches don't work, the third approach is always, always, always the 10% discount that's only good this quarter, right? So now what I would say is those techniques are all one and the same. These are all FOMO tactics, fear of missing out. We're trying to get the customer to understand you're going to miss out on these benefits. You're going to miss out on an opportunity to fix your status quo, or you're just going to miss out on this discount that I can offer you today. And if you wait, you're not going to get the discount because our prices go up and all this stuff. This didn't surprise us. We found that three-quarters of the time, when the customer expresses hesitation, three-quarters of the time, salespeople go back and they play out those FOMO techniques. But what did surprise us is that 84% of the time, they actually backfire. And to be very clear, it's not just that they don't work, it's that they actually make it worse. They increase the chances the deal will be lost to no decision. Now, this was really, really surprising to us. And for you or any of the listeners who know the Challenger sale, it was a little bit concerning because one of the things we said the challenger is so good at is beating the status quo, right? They're really good at convincing the customer to change. They're really good at showing the customer that the pain of the status quo is worse than the pain of change. So how could it be that the people, when doing these things actually makes things worse? And so we thought we were going to have to prepare for a global apology tour, when we wrote this new book. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. But we checked our math, we loaded more data in the sample, and it didn't change the outcome. And so we went into the data and we unpacked it. And here's what we learned. And this is kind of the jumping off point for the story. What we learned is that when we lose a deal to no decision, it's for two possible reasons. Now, salespeople have always been told it's always because the customer prefers the status quo, but it turns out that is one of the reasons, but that's only one of the reasons. There's a second reason. And the second reason you said before is fear. And it's indecision that is driven by the customer's fear of failure. Now, some people will say, well, staying with the status quo is a decision. And what we would say is it can be a decision. So if the customer says, I don't buy the value proposition, I don't think this is worth the investment, I think what we're doing today is good enough, those are all status quo reasons. And that is a big reason we lose deals in sales. We all know that. But indecision is fundamentally different. Indecision is a wasteland. It is a space between intent and action where the customer's stuck. They have not made a decision. They may intend to make a decision at some point, but they can't. And the thing that is holding them up is their fear of failure. Now, what this is interesting to salespeople because we found there's two reasons a deal is lost to no decision. The second thing we found is fear of failure is the bigger of the two reasons. It's almost 60% of lost deals in no decision area are because of fear of failure. And salespeople hear that, and I find it's confusing to them because a lot of times they will say to me, "Yeah, but I sell to the CFO. I sell to the CTO. I sell to senior executives. Those people get paid not to be afraid. They get paid to make the hard decisions. They think about ROI. They think about benefits, right? They think very clear in dollars and cents and euros, and they think very clear sense of what the payoff is. How is it that those people are so afraid? And so this has to do with something. We did a lot of research. This is unfortunately before ChatGPT could help us. We did a lot of our own research. We went out, we read like 40 years of social science literature. And what we found was that there is a big difference between what we know in sales, the status quo bias. I'm lazy. I don't want to change. What I do today is good enough. We're all familiar with that. That is very different from something called the omission bias. The omission bias is about our desire not to make a mistake. Now, I think in sales, we're all familiar with this idea of loss aversion. And loss aversion is, the simple experiment. And I beg forgiveness from folks who don't think in dollar terms, but I'm American, so I think in dollar terms. But the loss aversion holds that we as human beings are more wired to avoid loss than to maximize gain. A simple example to play in your head is how would you feel if you lost $100? It was in your pocket and it's gone. You went to the laundry and now it's gone, or you went to ride the metro or the subway, it's gone. Compare that with the feelings of you found $200 on the street. You just found it. And it turns out the negative feelings you feel about losing $100 outweigh the positive feelings you feel about finding $200. It doesn't make any rational sense at all, but that is the way we're wired. Now, most people in sales know that because they know that that's why the 10% discount is a powerful motivator, right? Because if the price goes up, you don't want to pay more later, so you want to avoid losing. So we know about loss aversion in sales. We're very familiar with this. But there's a wrinkle to this research that is really, really important. It's called the omission bias. The omission bias holds that there are two types of losses that people think about. On the one hand, you've got an error of omission. An error of omission is when you experience a loss because you did nothing. You sit on the sidelines, you sit on the fence, you keep your powder dry, and you experience a loss as a result. That's different from an error of commission. An error of commission is when you experience a loss that is directly the result of something you did, an action you took, a decision you made, and you are directly responsible for that loss. And it turns out the omission bias holds that we are okay with loss that happens when we do nothing. We are not okay with loss that happens when we are personally responsible. Again, here's a simple example. It's a little bit morbid, so I apologize to the audience. But it's a famous psychological. You give me a thumbs up. That's great. So you're like, go ahead. They'll blame you, not me. So it's famous psychological experiment. So imagine you're standing on the platform waiting for a train, and suddenly you see a train coming down the tracks, and there's a group of people standing on the tracks. They don't know the train is coming. 5 people. And you know that if that train keeps going, it's going to kill those 5 people. All of them will be dead, but there's a lever on the platform. And you know that if you pull that lever, it will send the train on a different track. But there are two people standing on that track, and both of them will die if you pull the lever. Now, will you pull the lever to save the five people but kill the two people? What psychologists find is that most people do nothing. And the reason they do nothing is that they're okay with being not directly responsible for the five people dying. They're not okay with being directly responsible for two people dying. It doesn't make any rational sense at all, right? But it is predictably irrational. And so, what salespeople need to understand is all of your attempts to dial up the FOMO with your customer, part of the reason they don't work is that your customer is okay with missing out, but they are not okay with messing up. That's the FOMO, not the FOMO, the fear of messing up. The not safe for work version is the FOFU, but I'll let your listeners figure out what that means. I won't say it. Even if you give me a thumbs up, I won't say it. So, but but that's the thing. And so now that's why if we go back and we say, okay, well, now I understand when my customer tells me I want to do business with you, I agree the status quo stinks. I agree that you're the vendor I want to work with. I agree this is a top priority for our business. And then I start to hesitate. When the salesperson tries to use the FUD or dangle the 10% discount, all they're doing is using scare tactics to sell to me, but I'm already afraid. I'm not afraid of missing out. I'm afraid of messing up. I'm afraid that I will be personally blamed if this doesn't work out. And so that's again the jumping up, a long explanation, but that's a jumping off point for the research around why this happens. But then, as we'll talk about, what do the best salespeople do to avoid that?
And thank you for the, the for going in detail into like fear, because as I told you, for me, the
Yeah,
book is a book about fear. And
that's right. Yeah.
you talked about the drivers of indecision, and I really liked the way you kind of silhouette them. Let me put it in this way. And in the book, you talk about valuation problems,
Yes.
lack of info, or outcome uncertainty, which can drive indecision. And
Yep.
when I was reading the book, I asked myself, is it possible that some companies have genetically
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
is it possible that they have these kind of sorts of indecision in a genetical way? Because I
Yeah.
think that some companies
It's
have
in the
these kind of
water.
thing. I don't know, like
Yeah.
they stick with the status quo and the tradition and whatever it is. And I wanted to ask you this question, like based on your
Yeah.
research, is it possible that these companies, so these people, that culture, I don't know how we want to call it, is full of indecision?
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I would just for the listeners, what I just to recap what you just said. So we found in the data, we went back 2.5 million sales calls, and what's so interesting about this is social scientists have found the same thing with people buying cars or choosing what classes to take at university. So these are the same things that we get hung up on. So before we said it's the fear of messing up that keeps people from moving forward, and you, as you point out, there are three specific things people are worried about messing up. The first one comes from choice overload. It's what you call the valuation problem. And that's what we talk about in the book. This is when the salesperson puts too many choices in front of the customer and they don't know what to pick. And the best choice in a world where you have lots of options and you don't know which one's the best, the easiest choice is to choose none of them, right? Because you don't want to choose the wrong one and then later on get blamed if it turned out it was the wrong version of the proposal, the wrong configuration of the solution. The second fear of failure comes from information overload. So this is where the customer feels like they have not done enough research. And what they're really trying to avoid is that after the purchase is made, maybe there's a new piece of information that comes up. And that information makes the purchase look like not such a great idea, and then fingers get pointed internally and they get pointed in your direction, and they say, well, whose job was it to do all the due diligence, to do all, oh, it was your job, so you didn't do your job. That's a bad look. The third one is this outcome uncertainty you talk about. That comes from expectations overload. This is where the customer literally does not feel like they will see the benefits from the purchase. Now, it's not that they feel like you'll steal their money. It's that we don't see that a lot in business to business sales. But what they do fear is that, maybe you're promising a 10x ROI, but what if we only get a 7x or an 8x ROI? Then I'm going to have to explain to the CFO who approved the budget why we didn't see the benefits. And in the current environment where there's a lot of scrutiny, there's a lot of layoffs happening, like that's not anything anybody wants any part of at all, right? And so if we think about these things, you asked the question about company culture, and I think that's very, very true. Look, we can all think about our customers, and I bet you these are many customers where We have lots of great conversations. They tell us how much they love our solution. They tell us how much better we are than our competitors. They love us. They want to do business with us, but they just never seem to move forward. And I think in a lot of those companies, making mistakes is actually punished, not rewarded. Because there's a lot, you know this very well, but there's a lot written about in leadership literature. We've got to create a culture where making mistakes is encouraged and rewarded, because that's the only way we learn. It's the only way we get better. It's the only way we take risks. But I think the reality is that in many, many companies, I would argue in many more companies, they may say that, but they don't really mean that. And so, it's really hard for for these executives and managers who are being asked to make decisions when the CEO says, get out there and make mistakes. But then I see all these people who got fired for making a big mistake. It's like, it doesn't really seem like you reward mistakes in the way you say. And look, it's if we think about the current environment, I'm hearing all the time from salespeople. I was talking to a salesperson just the other day who sells equipment to hospitals, that laboratory equipment, very expensive equipment. And he was telling me, he said, a lot of my customers, they want to switch to our equipment. They want to upgrade their equipment, but so many of them are like, it's fine. Well, and I can show them this, our equipment will lead to greater productivity. It will save you money. It will lead to fewer mistakes and better patient outcomes. It will lead to better staff engagement. And they don't argue with any of the data. They agree. They say this would make everything better, but they still won't move. And they still tell me, you know what? We're going to try to get another year of life out of our current equipment, and let's talk next year. Or sometimes they just stop answering my emails and they don't show up for the Zoom meetings, and they start ghosting me. And I think it really is because, nobody, even if I could show them the data and it makes perfect rational sense, they're still deeply afraid that if they don't get those benefits, they will be blamed. Or maybe they don't choose the right configuration, or maybe they don't do enough research. And nobody in the current environment wants to be blamed. It's okay to just keep your head down, go along with the status quo. Nobody got fired for maintaining the status quo, but people do get fired for trying to change the status quo and when it doesn't work out. And people right now, especially, people don't want to be that person.
And at the beginning of the show, I said that you keep on changing our job, and I will keep going with this joke for one simple reason, because you and Brent always say and put in your research, in your books, a lot of counterintuitive things.
Mm.
In 2011, you were the first one in the Challenger sale was kind of recognized as the insight book.
Right. Yeah.
Everyone has to go with insights. You need data. You need to show data. Okay.
Yeah.
Then, and you came there way before others. Okay. And now that everyone is talking about data,
Yeah.
it's 6 years that you purely focused on the human being, its fears and its kind of emotions and all the human being things that happen in a sale. And one of the most counterintuitive things, two of the most counterintuitive things I found in your book, is the opposite of what we learned so far. Like for the audience, Matt in his book says that interruption and over talking
Oh, yeah.
is not a minus, but a plus,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they increase the effectiveness of the conversation, they bring it back on track, they create more value, which is totally the opposite from what we learned so
Yeah.
far. So, that famous statistics: 70% you listen, 30%
Yeah.
you,
Yeah. Sometimes. Yeah.
60% you listen, 5% you breathe. These kind of things.
Yeah.
And can you please tell us more about these two counterintuitive things, because this is where the job is changing again for me.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of, there's a lot of thought leadership out there, on LinkedIn and other places about talk time. And, you have the old saying, like, you have two ears and one mouth. And so use them in the right proportions with the customer, and the best salespeople listen, and this and that. But that's actually what we found was, in order to get the customer, instill confidence, to get them to move forward and make a decision. Because remember, the things, have I done enough research? Have I chosen the right thing? Am I going to get what I'm paying for? Or am I going to look like a fool? Am I going to look like a fool or like a hero? These are the fears our customer have. This is what is keeping them from moving forward. In order to instill the confidence that we as a salesperson are there, we've got their back, we've got a safety net, we are going to help them get those benefits, we're going to make them look like a hero, we have guided them to make the right choice. We have helped them understand in all the information they're swimming in what they need to pay attention to and what they can ignore. In order to do that, we need to be actively engaged in the conversation. There's an old saying, I think, in sales, which is every good salesperson is a trusted advisor to their customer. And I think the problem with that is that we say it a lot, but we never define what it really means. So if we were to break it down for one moment, I know you didn't ask about this, but I'll speak to it anyway. Think about trusted advisors, two words. We got to be trusted and we have to be an advisor. If we're going to be trusted, how do we build trust in sales? Well, we've got to understand is our customer does not trust us. And it's not because we are bad people. It's not because we did anything wrong. It's not because we work for a bad company. It is because the customer has a very long history and memory of all the other salespeople who overpromised and underdelivered, who confuse the present and the future tense when describing what their product can do, who leave the customer holding the bag, who didn't share all the bad information about the product or solution, only shared the good information, who said the product could do this, but it turns out it can't really do that. So customers have a long memory about these, and they also understand that salespeople are paid on driving big deals, right, and closing big deals, and so they believe you are paid not to share the bad information with me. You're only going to say every time I ask you, can your product do this? You're going to say yes. Every time, can it integrate with that? You're going to say yes. Every time I say, is this on the roadmap? You're going to say yes. And I asked to talk to one of your customers. Guess what? You're going to put me on the phone with the really happy customers. You're not going to put me on the phone with the upset customers. Like nobody does that. So the customer believes it is their job to find out what you're hiding from them. So what do the best salespeople do? What the best salespeople do is they're very honest and very transparent and very come clean on all of the bad information and the good information. Now, this is hard because especially your average salespeople, they don't like bringing up bad news. But your great salespeople will say, listen, you've talked about what you're trying to accomplish in your business. We can help you with these things. These things I want to be very clear, we can't help you with. If that's the most important thing for you, you should call our competitor because they're much better at that than we are. We think we're better at these things. But if your needs align with our strengths, we should do business. If not, I want to help put you in touch with somebody who can help you. Or they might say something like, listen, I know you're really excited about this capability, but it's brand new in our solution. It's not really been tested. There's only a couple of customers using it, and it hasn't been the easiest transition for them. And so I don't want you to build your business case on that. It's going to be ready in 6 months. It's going to be perfect, but right now it's really not. Or for instance, how about this? Telling the customer, I'd love to sell you the $1 million solution and with all the bells and whistles and all the integrations and all the features and benefits, but I don't think you need that. I actually think the $100,000 solution would be better. It would be totally fine for your needs, and we can expand into the bigger solution later. Now, when you do those things, what it shows the customer is that you can be trusted. Your job is not to hide the dirty laundry, to put one over on them, to oversell them. Your job is to help them get to a great decision. And you could be an honest broker of information. That's the first part of being a trusted advisor. What's the second part? You've got to be in a position to advise your customer. And if the customer does not see you as an expert on what you're selling, if you don't know the product better than they do, if you don't know it, at least maybe you're not going to know it as well as the engineers and the product people, of course, but you've got to have a level of competence. And when you're displaying your competence, that usually means you're talking a lot in sales calls. So it's back to your question before. If I'm knowledgeable about my product and I know all the ins and outs and I know what works and what doesn't work and I know how customers use it and how they get value, I want to share that. And if that's valuable, the customer is going to listen to what I have to say. We actually found it was interesting. We found the opposite to have a disastrous effect when the customer says things and they feel like it's the salesperson's quiet. There's like a deer in the headlights. That tells the customer, this person does not know a heck of a lot about this. They don't know much more about this than I do. And I don't think they're in a position to guide me or to provide any advice. And I'm going to have to do a lot of my own research. This person's just here to get me a contract and quote me a price. They're not really a trusted advisor. They might be trusted, but they're not an advisor. And so an advisor demonstrates their expertise by talking and engaging. You mentioned the interruptions piece too. That's a very interesting one. All of our parents, I think, told us, interrupting people is rude, right? And what I don't want to suggest is, hey, salespeople, go and talk a lot and interrupt your customers, and then you're going to sell more. That's what you're saying has to be valuable in order for it to be worth occupying the time. If what you're sharing is not valuable, you should probably talk less. The interruptions piece, there's a really fine distinction here. these are not rude interruptions. This is what linguists call cooperative overlapping. So, to I think about, like, an example would be a conversation you might have with your best friend or with your partner or family member or something like that, and you're engaged and you're active and it's lively and you finish each other's sentences and you jump in, and it feels like that person is totally invested in that conversation. you know um, and that's how it feels to a customer when somebody is not interrupting but cooperatively overlapping, and when they're sharing their expertise.
I read the book and then I figured out a lot of things I was doing in practice, because in the last 2 years, I've seen the customer not going through questioning fatigue,
Yeah,
like we ask too many questions, but I saw the customer becoming suspicious when I asked way too many questions.
yeah,
Imagine a Zoom call. If I go over a number, like I don't have a research, but if I go over 6, 7, 8 questions, at
yeah,
that point in time, body language changes,
yeah,
their way of talking changes. And then I understood, okay, maybe that is a more effective way. And a lot of the questions were kind of reframed as a conversation as we having now,
yeah,
because it, it,
yeah,
it seems that it's a way better method to continue the conversation.
yeah, yeah,
Instead of having this kind of interview, that because the customer becomes suspicious. And this is where I realized, oh, okay, got it. Now I got the point that Matt said in the
yeah.
book. I have another question about the
Sure.
book, which is mainly for complex sales. I work in complex sales that involve a lot of people, and so as a few of my listeners, or many of my listeners, and in the book you mentioned that high performers, sorry, are highly independent. They do their own job, they do their own stuff.
Yeah.
For example, they're kind of independent in showing the demo to a client
Mhm.
without even engaging a kind of sales engineer or anyone else. Now, I I would like to ask you
Yeah.
that, due to that, some of us sell complex
Yeah.
things and they require a lot of people.
Sure.
Like, how do we make this owning the information work without
Yeah.
jeopardizing the deal? Because when
Yeah.
I read
Yeah.
the book, I said, okay, cool. I understand this. I can do this for small
Uh-huh.
deals, for, let's say, more transactional things of my portfolio. But how can I apply this theory for the complex one? How
Yeah.
can I
Yeah.
avoid
Yeah.
that I become the guy, the lone wolf that you
Yeah.
were talking about in the challenger sale?
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I think, and this is a really good question. We One of the things we talk about in the book, go back to this idea of trusted advisor. One of the things about being an advisor too is that you don't show up with what we would call the clown car of experts on every single call. Such the solutions engineer, the sales engineer, the product person, the executive sponsor, the customer success manager, like everybody's on the call. And then what average salespeople do is they say, "Hey, I brought this whole team," and then they just sit back and they let the team talk to the customer. Now, that may feel like it's a good thing. I know all the right people. I got them on the phone with the customer. The customer loves it. They're answering all the questions. But what they don't realize is, in that moment, something very bad happens to you as a salesperson, which is you get delegated down to the person you sound like. And if all you sound like is a glorified administrator or a glorified MC, then that's how your customer then perceives you. So if your only value is that you can get people on the calendar and get them to show up to a Zoom call, and then you sit back and take notes and you don't offer any value, then why would the customer trust your advice? For instance, if you're offering a recommendation, the O in Jolt, and you're trying to get them to choose one of the options, and you say to them, "I think you should go this way." Well, why should I listen to you? Because on all the calls we've had, you didn't say anything, and you let the product team and the solutions engineers talk the whole time, and you didn't add any value. Or if I'm trying to if I'm trying to say to you, "Listen, I don't think you need another demo. I don't think you need another reference call. Trust me." Well, why should I trust you? Because you haven't taught me anything. And so I think this is the takeaway there is, and this is really important, is not that you need to know everything about the product at the same depth as a sales engineer, at the same depth as a product person, because that's not what you get paid to do. You get paid to be a salesperson. You're a commercial person, so you're not a product expert. But what it does mean is two things. One, in the near term, on every single call, you need to be seen as, use the American football analogy, you have to be seen as the quarterback, right? You are running the offense. You are the person calling the plays. And so when I show up with my team of experts, my 5 people who showed up to help me on the call, my colleagues, subject matter expert, solutions engineer, CS manager, executive sponsor. You don't just let them run with it. What you do is you have a call in advance and you say, Matt, I need you to talk about this. Brent, I need you to talk about that. Dwight, I need you to talk about that. Here are the questions we're going to answer. But guys, remember, I'm running the show here and I need you to keep your answers short. And I need you to make sure that the customer comes back to me, because what I don't want to have happen, and you don't want it either, is the customer starts reaching out to you directly and you want them coming to me. And if you guys do all the talking, they'll never see me as an expert. And then when your partners hear that, they say, okay, I've got it. Because what I think I'm providing value to my sales partner, but actually I'm hurting them because I'm doing all the talking and it's making them look like an admin. So I think that's a near term thing. Long term, what that means is everybody in sales, no matter what you sell, no matter how complex, you need to make it a goal after, from this call to the next call, from today to tomorrow to next week to next month, next quarter. You are going to know more about your product. You're going to be able to answer more questions. You're going to be able to do more of the demo, in a quarter than can do this quarter, or in a month than you can do this month. That just means we have to have a development plan. And I think that it's interesting because in a lot of companies, and I've worked for some of these companies, they will tell salespeople, "Oh, no, no, you don't need to know the product. We've got product people, we've got engineers, we've got solutions, and you get the visit, you set up the call, we'll get the right people on the phone." And then they're surprised that their salespeople can't close deals and they can't instill confidence with the customer. I think what the best salespeople, even in those companies, have done is they've said, you know what, I'm going to listen every time the product person answers a question, every time our engineers answer a question, and I'm taking notes. And then next time when the customer asks that question, I'm going to try to answer it myself. Now, I'm never going to fake it, and I'm only going to answer if I understand the answer and if we can confidently give it. But every little bit, I can improve my product knowledge. I'll never get to the level of a product person. That's okay. By the way, they're never going to be salespeople either, so it's okay, right? But but you have to aspire to get deeper on your product, and that's just a longer term investment that we each need to make in our careers. And I think personally, I say that that's part of the reason I always tell salespeople, you should be passionate about what you're selling. Because if you're not excited about the product and you're not excited about the value it delivers and you're not excited about the difference it can make for customers, then what motivation do you have to learn more about it? So when you're choosing that sales job, make sure you're really excited about what it is. You're really excited about the difference it makes in the life of the customer, and you get, because that motivates you to want to learn more about it.
You know what I found this totally interesting because this is actually what's going on in the world of complex sales.
Yeah.
People, and I understood that, for example, my customers, they value a lot when I'm able to bring in the right people,
Uh-huh.
but still be able to do the dirty job. Let me use
Yes.
this word. You know
Yep.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like trying to escalate things, trying to
Yep.
move things, try to, but then still lead the show in a, let's say, in a direct or indirect way. This is what I learned, and this is what I try to do, and what I totally agree on your book. I know you're running short on time. I have just two other questions, and the
Sure. Yeah.
first one will be probably a trigger because I triggered also Brand on this, and I will do the same with you. Like, let's talk about sales research industry. Let's call it buying research industry.
Uh-huh.
And you're one of the best in doing this. Brand is one of the best. But based on your experience, what do you think we lack in this world now? If you look at yourself, your competition, the market, what they ask you, I just want
Yeah.
to know what kind of thing you lack, but also what kind of things should have been done that haven't been done so far.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really good question. I think that in sales research, right, in the space that Brent and I play in, you've seen a tremendous change in the way that research is done. And so, um, what I will say first off, to answer your second question first, the thing that hasn't been done, I think in general, there hasn't been a lot of research done in sales. So I think in general, that is a statement of fact. Professor Neil Rackham, who wrote the foreword to Challenger Sale, of course, was the author of Spin Selling, which I think was one of the first great studies, research-based studies of sales. Again, Professor Rackham is a psychologist. He is not a sales leader. He's not a salesperson. He studies salespeople. So it's very similar to me and Brent. But he would say that one of his great regrets is that there hasn't been more serious research done in sales. That was why Challenger got his attention as a serious database study of salespeople and sales behaviors. So I think that's the first thing. What we lack is more research. And look, there's so many questions in sales. Every time we do research, we find more questions, and we then need to go find the answers. And you do find a lot of research being done in product and in marketing and in strategy and in finance, operations, procurement, IT. But there's not a lot of serious research done in sales. Sales seems to be the domain of personal opinion. So there's a lot of, and I don't mean to denigrate, there's a lot of great speakers and writers and folks out there, and they've got tremendous personal experience having led sales teams. They're very motivational, inspiring, but they're not researchers. And so you have to take what they're saying with a bit of a grain of salt, which is it may have worked for you, but that's a sample size of one, not a sample size of thousands or millions of sales calls or what have you. Now, I think in terms of back to your first question, and if I think about how this space is evolving, go back to Professor Rackham's study, spin selling. That took him and his team, I think, 12 years. It was a team more than 10 people. It cost millions of dollars in today's dollars. They sat in on 30,000 sales calls, like sat in the office and took notes. Now you fast forward to the Challenger sale. We used there's some other research in that vein too. We used database methods, survey based methods to go out to thousands of sales managers to get them to evaluate their salespeople. Something that became possible with modern technologies, survey platforms like Qualtrics and other platforms like that. Now we fast forward to the Jolt Effect. We have machine learning and unstructured data like recorded sales interactions, which now allow us to study at scale what's really happening in the sales conversation. So, what's going to be the next evolution there? And what I think you're going to find is that if we as sales researchers, we embrace technology to be able to fuel the way we understand the customer buying environment, the way we understand what best salespeople do, it's going to allow us to study at more scale in faster than we ever, Neil Rackham ever could back in the day. I mean, that's like the Moore's law of sales research. It improves in productivity and scale and accuracy literally every minute. And so I think for us in sales research, it's important that we continue to kind of evaluate and embrace some of those methods and challenge ourselves, right? In terms of, well, we may have done this research this way and it worked for us when we did the Challenger sale, but how are we going to change the way we do it? Because now we don't need to do surveys. We can study recorded sales conversations, or we could use other methods.
Fun fact: Neil Ragam was my teacher at university.
Oh, really? Okay, there you go.
University
Oh, you're
of
lucky. Yeah,
Edinburgh. Yeah, and I have a bachelor in psychology too, and
yeah,
a
yeah,
master's degree in sales. And I asked him this question. I
yeah,
said, "Why did I have to fly?" It was back in 2016. Why did I have to fly from Italy to Scotland
yeah,
to study methods of a guy from US?
yeah,
Where is research industry? And then he gave me this question. He told me that is way too there is not that much sales. That was not at that time, I think. So
yeah,
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 fun fact.
yeah.
Last one question for you, and
Sure.
um, except for the book which is out, what are you working on now? Where we will see you in the next months?
Yeah, actually, so we just finished a new study, and it's a different study. So this is, one of the places I think that I've always struggled with things like Challenger. One of the places where it doesn't work so well or doesn't fit really is in professional services. And so when I say professional services, I'm talking about people who sell legal advice, accounting, management consulting, strategy consulting, investment banking, executive search, talent, HR consulting, talent advisory. These are businesses where a couple of things are different. If you're selling software, you sell the software. You're not really selling yourself. You're selling the software. But in professional services, you're selling yourself. You're selling your own expertise. And the second thing that's different is, in software or medical devices, you sell the product, the customer uses the product, you go on and you sell the next customer. It's kind of a linear process. In professional services, it's circular. So you sell it, but then you also deliver it, and then you're trying to go resell it and grow the relationship. So I've always found that some of our work in business to business sales always kind of fell flat when I was presenting it to consulting firms, to law firms, accountants, etc. And so we just finished up a large scale global study of top what we call rainmakers in professional services firms. So we have data on close to 2,000 partners at professional services firms around the world, about I think 25 firms that we have participated, and across all those different segments, law, accounting, consulting, etc. And we did a very similar methodology we did with Challenger. We looked at the profiles. We actually found there were 5 profiles, but they're totally different from what you find in B2B sales. And that makes sense because it's a different kind of sale. And so that for me is kind of scratching an itch that I feel like is was bothering me for a long time. The other thing I would say is just very similar to Challenger, that market is changing dramatically. It used to be that procurement wasn't really involved in when it came to hiring law firms and consulting firms. And, senior executives would say, "Well, I play golf with the partner from this law firm or this, so we're going to hire them." That doesn't happen so much anymore. Now procurement's really getting involved, and there's a lot more competition. You ask these firms, and they would say, "We feel like our clients are much less loyal to us than they once were." It used to be automatic. They would just, if we did a good job, they would hire us again. Now we do a good job, and they're still making us do an RFP or compete for the business. So it's a very different environment. And so what we're finding is the profile of successful partners in professional services is changing as well. And this is a really big industry. Like in the US, I think it's 900,000 professional services firms. It's like a $3 trillion global business or something. It's massive. And so this we think is exciting because it's our first industry specific study we've done. So we're going to start publishing the results here over the next coming weeks and months, and look for that. Look for that maybe in a bookstore near you. So
Absolutely. I will be the first one buying this, even if I sell software. Matt,
yeah,
thank you so much for being here. I really
thank you for having
appreciated
me.
the time you took to talk to me. I learned a lot, and really best of luck for the Jolt Effect, which is already doing well, but especially for the next research that I'm looking forward to, read and study and whatever.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. It was great to be your guest, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Absolutely. Something more is coming.
Absolutely, you got it.
Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.